This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.
Welcome back, everyone. She is somebody that has deep experience in helping people with their speech patterns, and so much more. And a lot of times when we hear from or about a speech pathologist, a lot of times we're thinking about children or people with some issues along the way. What about somebody who suffers a stroke or other afflictions? We're going to look at that today through the eyes of a speech pathologist and what can be done in terms of rehabbing them back to better speech. She's the woman behind Cape and Speech Therapy. Cathy Salciccia is back with us. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. How are you?
Very well, very well. Important topic today. This is just a different way to look at what you do and what a challenge it is for someone whose speech has been affected by a stroke or something similar. Where do we start today?
Well, I think we can start with the numbers. I mean, when you consider the fact that 2 million people in the United States, according to the American Speech and Hearing Association, are living with a language impairment from aphasia, from a stroke, and that close to 180,000 are diagnosed per year. 180,000 people with aphasia from some form of stroke, or potentially it can come from a brain infection, or it can come from a head injury, a focal head injury. There are several different reasons why you can have aphasia. It is quite a thing for a person to be dealing with and for their families to be dealing with. It can take someone from having been totally communicative to being in total social isolation. And it's to me, it's a profound issue that affects many people, and it's not just the old, although you have an increase in the number of people who may have aphasia from strokes, say maybe 40% over the age of 85. But I can tell you that in my career, I have worked with some very young strokes. I've worked with people with strokes, as early as a teenager to 19 years old, people in their 20s, 40s, 50s, 60s with aphasia that is quite severe. And they may not just exhibit aphasia, they may have something called dysarthria, which is more of a motor problem that affects your ability to move parts of speech. That's called a dysarthria. They may also have that in addition to their aphasia, and they may also have something called an apraxia, which is a motor planning problem, and can co-occur with their stroke. So I think that's a place to start, is just the numbers. And why it is important for people to take care of their health. It's important. And now more than ever, where there are issues around healthcare and the cost of healthcare and getting funding for healthcare, that I think the onus is on the public to really know about this, to know the ramifications of not having your blood pressure checked, of not going to a doctor on a regular basis to have that blood pressure checked, to manage that blood pressure in whatever way it can be managed, and to know the signs of a stroke. There's this acronym BFAST, which stands for balance, eyes. If the face is drooping, if the eyes are drooping on one side, if the speech is showing signs of impairment, and time, that's the T at the end, be fast. And the time means get to an ER as quickly as possible. And so I bring this up because I think it's important that people really understand the ramifications of not taking care of their health and how it can affect them later on. A younger person who's in their work life all of a sudden gets a communication impairment, you're not going to be able to work. It's going to be very difficult. You may lose your career. If it's a career that involves communication, such as mine and yours, right? And all of a sudden you lose language and you can't understand what's being said to you, it is extremely debilitating.
It was a year and a half ago. I lost my voice. I had some kind of virus and never get sick. And I went to an ENT. He scoped and everything. And he said, yeah, you may need therapy to learn how to talk again. And I was like, what? Well, I couldn't say anything, but I was like, oh my gosh. But faced with that reality, it came back. Speech came back within 2 weeks. I was able to talk, but just, that was a wake up. That was a wake up. And yeah, you're 100% right. We are our best advocate when it comes to our health. And that's just unfortunately a product of our environment now, where health insurance is costly or challenging, even making appointments and all of that for another podcast. But you need to stay on top of things. And especially as you get older, it's so important. And even on other health angles here, even younger people being diagnosed with colon cancer, of all things.
That's right. That's right.
That's on the rise too.
That's right. Yeah. And you have issues around eating patterns. Sometimes eating patterns can start young and they're deeply ingrained, and people don't necessarily want to switch to healthier forms of eating or exercising or in whatever way that's correct for your body. I'm not saying one way is better than another. I'm just saying that it's really, really important that this be addressed, that people are paying attention. I have worked with many strokes in my career. I have just taken a new one on my caseload, and it's such a disabling issue. And for some, they may be in a wheelchair, right? They may have total affectation of one side of their body, or they may not. They may be able to walk around, get dressed, shower, get dressed, watch TV. Some of them are able to cook, but they can't communicate. And so it becomes almost like an invisible disability, because they look perfectly fine from the outside, and then all of a sudden they're having trouble with communication. And so when we're talking about aphasia, we're talking about some different kinds of aphasia that are very much linked to where the damage was in the brain and the extent of that damage. Usually, and I say usually because there can be some variation, but usually on the left side of the brain. It's the left side of the brain that can affect the right side of the body, but then can result in language impairment. And this language impairment can affect comprehension to varying degrees, verbal expression to varying degrees, reading and writing. And it can also affect some of the cognitive processes, such as attention, focused attention, being able to scan their environment. For some, they have an overlay of a visual impairment where they're missing a visual part of their visual field. And so you might see their head tilting a little bit when they're looking at visual, written information. And there are different kinds. There's what's called a Broca's aphasia, which is an aphasia that usually sounds more telegraphic. The person may speak in content words like hands, wash, kitchen, right? So they may be able to get some content out, and they may have very good comprehension, right? But they may not be able to create grammar or have those little words, like those prepositions and those thes, what we call the articles, the and but they can get some content words out. And so in some ways they can be more functional, even if they have limited speech. They can be more functional than our Wernicke's aphasics, who may have huge amounts of language coming out, almost like a word salad,
Mm.
but can't be understood. And their auditory comprehension may be extremely impaired. So they're not even able to self-monitor what's coming out of their own mouths, right? Right. And then you have more global aphasics who are affected in comprehension, in expression, verbal expression, but also across the other modalities of reading and writing. I have had some whose comprehension is great, but they can't make themselves understood at all, who can read really well, but they can't write. So what a speech pathologist basically has to do, and is trained to do, is to evaluate the person who comes in with a communication impairment. And we have varying tests that we can use that isolate each of those modalities and enables us to evaluate comprehension and verbal expression and reading and writing, social communication, and what we call pragmatics, how that person is actually responding in an interactive communication fashion. And then we can basically come up with what type of aphasia this is based upon our evaluation. If we have access to the CT scans and the MRIs, they can give us a good clue as to what we might expect based upon the locations in the brain that were affected by the stroke.
Wow, I find that fascinating. That can help you in your rehab?
What you mean the brain locations?
And yeah, looking at the diagnostics, the
Well,
scans.
yes,
Mm.
absolutely. So here is an example. I just took a client on, and she clearly presents as a Wernicke's aphasic. She has a lot of language coming out. She has a lot of difficulty understanding what's being said to her, right down to difficulty answering yes/no questions,
Mm.
responding to yes/no questions, uh, or even being following basic directions, right? But she has trouble repeating what you say to her. So if you say, okay, say mom, she can't repeat it back, right? Well, that goes along with a Wernicke's aphasic. However, there was something peculiar about the way she was having trouble with repetition. One of the things that I noticed is that tasks that she could do spontaneously, that would just words that would just come out, she couldn't do them on command. Or she can point spontaneously, but she can't point on command. And
Mm.
but can do better when she had a mirror in front of her. So I suspected that she had a motor planning problem on top of all of this
Wow.
that wouldn't normally go along with her Wernicke's aphasia. But when I looked at her MRIs and saw that a particular part of her brain, the insula, had been affected, then that made sense to me. That she was one of those rare individuals that could have a Wernicke's aphasia with a motor planning problem on top of that.
Oh my gosh. This runs so deep. And all
Right.
of this, and you have to meet them where they are in the challenges in their life and then figure out, because they might not even know what they're capable of or not capable of.
Right. They don't
Yeah.
know what they're not capable of and what they're capable of. But then you also, yeah, Steve, you also have the problem where they may go into an acute care setting, hospital setting,
Hmm.
may be seen by a speech therapist there, and then get moved over to a rehabilitation location. Depending upon the rehab location, they will probably get speech and physical therapy and occupational therapy and all of the different rehabilitations that are available to them. And I don't know, they may get speech therapy 3 times a week or 2 times a week, or maybe if they're in an aggressive rehab, they might get it even 5 days a week. But it'll be for a short period of time. And you have to understand, after a person has a stroke, they're tired. They can be exhausted. It's said that there's a 3-month recovery, spontaneous recovery period where your brain is healing and swelling goes down. And so you can expect to have some return that's just spontaneous. But my experience has been in more acute settings that these patients are very often too tired to maximally benefit from the speech therapy that's being made available to them aggressively. Then they may go home and get like a visiting nurses sort of situation, home care situation. But I have rarely seen them get daily speech therapy in the home care setting. They may get 2 times. I don't know, maybe they might get 3 times, but I think at most 2 times. But their caseloads, the caseloads of those speech pathologists are quite large, and they're traveling all over the place to see their patients at home. So then at a certain point, they're going to be discharged from home care. And that's where I worry. That's where I worry, because they may be referred to an outpatient setting, which would be great, but there could be a waiting list for that outpatient setting, right? Where they might not get in right away. Or they may not have a way to get to the person's office. Now, in the case of, and I would assume that this is true in New York with New York Medicaid, but for example, with our Mass Health cases, if they're on Mass Health, for example, they can be made eligible for transportation to my office. In other words, there's a certain form, and if you contact the doctor, you get that form filled out and how many visits a week they might need. You might be able to get transportation to go to their homes and pick them up and bring them to your office. But then there may be people who are not eligible for Mass Health. They may have other types of insurance that doesn't provide them with transportation, and they may not be able to travel on their own, or they may not have family who are able to get them to your office. And so you have people who have been discharged who are languishing at home with communication impairment. That's number one. Now, in my case, I live in Gloucester, and we're sort of a close by, enclosed kind of community. And so I have a particular patient where this is the case, and she does not have anybody to bring her. I'm going to her house. As a matter of fact, a half an hour from now, after we end this, I'll be going to her house.
Wow.
And I'm going to give her speech therapy at the house because she can't get to me. So my point here is access is important. Insurance is important. The type of insurance you have is important. And your ability to aggressively advocate for more speech therapy than would typically be given. So from my estimation, this individual has comprehension, expression, reading, writing problems. She needs more than 2 times a week. She needs 3 to 4 times a week. And if I can get anybody else in there to help, then we'll get somebody else to also assist. And so I will, I advocate for my patients. If it's the case of a managed Medicare or managed care kind of situation, I may have to write a justification as to why I am recommending that amount of speech therapy. But from my standpoint, if someone is within 3 months of having had a stroke and they're home now and they've passed through acute care and home care, and they really need the attention of an outpatient speech therapist, they need more time. And so that's one of the things that I do. I try to aggressively advocate for them.
It sounds like consistency is very much key here in terms of the rehab.
Right. Yeah. It has to be consistent. And especially if you don't have family at home who can do some of the work for carryover. And that's one of the issues. One of the issues I have had professionally is, you may go and see do a speech therapy session twice a week on a Monday and a Thursday, or a Tuesday and a Friday. But what's going on in between? How is that carrying over, or is it carrying over? So I believe in access, and making sure the person can see me for what I believe is the correct amount of therapy, give them every chance they can to recover as much as they can. Now, there are some people who, I have worked with people who we have regained tremendous amounts of functional communication when neurologists told them that they most likely would only talk in a couple of words. I had one particular patient, her neurologist said this was extensive damage. She'll only, talk a little bit. And I put her on 5 days a week. And I saw her aggressively. We got her family involved. We had neighbors involved. 6 to 8 months later, she was talking functionally, able to understand, able to communicate with her husband, because this was a big deal. They were having a lot of trouble because he couldn't understand her, and she was having trouble understanding him. And she went back to the neurologist a year later, and he started talking directly to her husband, thinking that she didn't have communication. And he said, "Why don't you talk to her?" And she said, "I thought I was never going to talk again after talking to you." And
Wow.
He was right. So that may not happen all the time. I'm not saying that that's going to happen all the time. But what I can say is, you need people who are going to truly evaluate these patients, to truly understand what their issue is and what the best way is to approach it. Give them the aggressive speech therapy that they need, with the carryover, and the words you used was important, the consistency. And you don't know, you may be able to bring it back large amounts of their communication, right? I have one guy whose speech has not really improved that much, but he's now able to write in paragraphs. Well, that makes a big difference if you need to communicate and you have your phone, and you can very, quickly make your needs known through texting or through, on a note. That makes a big, a difference. Or there may be the need to use a communication device. There's a device called a Lingraphica that has been made very for working with language impaired patients who have strokes. And that person may be a candidate, or you can train them potentially to be a candidate to use that communication.
Thank you for sharing all of this today. Just so much to talk about here. And I truly...
It's huge.
It is. There's so many variables, but I really appreciate you even starting with the reminder to take care of our health, because it doesn't matter how much money you have. Something happens with your health because you didn't take care of it. No amount of money is going to get that back.
Right.
Wow.
And things do happen to even people who take care of their health. So there you may have people who do the exercise and they eat well, and things will happen. So my feeling is, do the best you can and take control of what you can do.
CapeAndSpeechTherapy.com is your website, right?
Yes.
Beautiful.
That's great.
Anybody's got any questions, reach out that way, or please, instant feedback, steve@gmail.com. If you're dealing with somebody that may have had a stroke, you need some insight on the speech pathology end of things, or just in general about that subject, send them over. Keep them, if you want, anonymous. That's fine too. We'd love to answer your questions and take on your feedback. Thank you very much, Cathy, for being here today.
Thank you so much. Take
Appreciate
care now.
You too.
This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.